Hi everyone, and welcome to the Cybersecurity Sauna. My name is Janne Kauhanen, and I will be your sauna majuri and the host of this podcast. Thank you for joining us for another session where we sweat out the hot topics in security. Welcome to all listeners, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at Cybersauna. People are an integral part of any successful cybersecurity operation. However, if you're a CISO or somebody else responsible for defending an organization, you probably understand that giving security teams the right tools is critical for detecting and responding to attacks. Today we're joined remotely by Frank Fransen, Senior Scientist in Cybersecurity at TNO and Technical Coordinator of the EU's Soccrates project, which is developing a new cybersecurity-oriented decision-making platform, and John Rogers, Global Head of Incident Response for WithSecure, to discuss the role automation can and should play in cyber defenses. So for our listeners that are unfamiliar with what defenders actually do when responding to a potential security incident, can you guys quickly describe what that might look like?
Well, it depends on what you mean with a security incident. If you say that the incident is a compromise in your network, then it's a reactive response, but you also have proactive. So when you learn of a new vulnerability or a new threat, where you then have to assess how that could affect your infrastructure, look for what systems are vulnerable, see what you can do, if you can patch it, or if you have to block the traffic because your patch window is in the weekend or something, and or take the system offline. Those decisions have then to be made. But if you are in an incident response where you actually are compromised, then typically you follow a certain path, and it also depends on how you learn of the incident and what type of incident it is. But generally you say there are the following phases, like detection, where you learn of the suspicious behavior or an actual port that you are compromised. And then you go into analysis where you actually have to discover what is all compromised, what's all happening in your infrastructure. And if you have a clear understanding of that, then you can go to the containment, where you try to lock out the intruder, that he doesn't have any control of your infrastructure anymore. And when you've done that correct, then you can go to the eradication, where you take away malware or the root cause vulnerabilities in your infrastructure so that you did not get compromised when you back live. And then you have to recover. So all these steps and all these things are what defenders do in case of an incident. But what they usually do is look at the screen where all the alerts come in and shifting through what is actually going on in the infrastructure and making sure that it's that they're not compromised in a way.
That sounds like exactly what John's been telling me about. John, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd word it slightly differently. I think it depends on who's responsible for looking at, is this the first line of support or higher up? Usually our team gets brought into varying levels of incident, but I would say the first thing to do is to get an understanding of the situation that the victim's currently experiencing, identifying any potential sources of evidence that can be used to prove or disprove that they actually have an incident. You'll be surprised at the number of times we get contacted and it actually just turns out to be a false positive, either on an actual alert, or someone just is a bit skeptical, or someone thinks that someone's out to get them. So we always need to first identify what can be used as evidence, and then once we have it, look into it to figure out if this was an incident or not. After that, we get to the stages as Frank outlined earlier.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a little bit of uncertainty and murkiness there in the beginning. But in a typical response scenario, how do people and technologies work together?
I found it a difficult question because technology is currently used by the human analyst to collect information, correlate the events with other events, collect threat intel and match that with what signals he has. So in general, it's the human that is coordinate control on the driver's seat, and yet he uses technology to support him in his task. And that could also be case management and communication with other response team members, which is also technology. And in recent years, you've seen now EDR and XDR and SOAR tools entering the market, but they're typically capable of responding to certain events or triggered to do a response, but it's limited in scope or a specific playbook that they can away. But usually the human is still in control. And when you have a larger incident where you actually have to combine a large number of events and things that are is going on.
Yeah, I would say that's a a fair point. Technology really comes down to automating some of the common tasks that analysts are required to do, and most importantly, on the volume of the tasks that they're required to do. There are just too many potential alerts or potential security issues that might come up in an organization, and everyone's got their day job and they've got other things on their plate. Sometimes organizations have multiple threat actors on an environment. They don't have the time to go away and figure out if some of the new antivirus detections are in fact an incident or not. So that's where having technology to go away and automate some of those low-level indicators to figure out, is this indeed an incident? Is this worth prioritizing the incident response team or your security team time investigating the matter further? So remember, incident response is typically brought in to deal with a technology failure. So while we'd like to use technology as much as possible, we've got to remember that the reason why we're there is because technology failed in the first place. And yeah, we love using as much tech as we can, but you've got to be conscious of stations, really.
Are there some key challenges facing security operations centers, computer security incident response teams that, automation can play a role in helping that you wish you had more or better automation in?
John has already made a couple of good points where you say that too many security events and false positives and sifting through those. And within the Soccrates project, we identified a couple of other trends that are going on, which complicate works for the security, the SOC people and the incident responders. So one of the things is that ICT is increasingly getting complex and changing and interdependent. And that makes it complicated for those people to actually understand what is going on, because they have to understand what it is, the infrastructure that they're actually protecting. But as it constantly changes, they also have to learn of new technologies, etc. So it's a complex task. Another thing is that there is an increased number of attacks, and the complexity of these attacks are increasing, and the threat landscape is continuously changing for each. So they have to also continuously learn of what's now new, what is going on at the moment. Again, a new challenge for the incident responders and SOC people. And then you also see that the attacks are getting more automated, whereas the response in the Security Operations Center is still human-driven. And there's a difference in speed. The automation is much quicker than the human understanding and his use of tools. And then he escalates it, etc. So giving these challenges, the task that the defenders are faced with is increasingly getting complex. But on the other hand, you see that there is a shortage of skilled personnel, and the cybersecurity staff that you have in the SOC and incident responders that are qualified to actually do this job is scarce. So combining things is saying for us that, we have to actually increase the number of automation and to actually help these people that do this job to make it actually more efficient to do that job. So creating more speed in the detection and response of an ongoing attack, or increasing their capability to make sure that their infrastructure is resilient for attacks by taking away vulnerabilities or preparing for new threats. And then you can do with automation.
Yeah, I can speak for hours about SIEMs and detection and response. There's got a structure, what's worth speaking about. But yeah, Frank, I definitely agree with you. SIEMs or SOCs are overwhelmed with the amount of information that they are presented with. And often technology is a little bit too slow to process through that data. I was speaking to a client the other day, and I think they mentioned they collect 10 terabytes worth of logs on a daily basis. And if you just think about the scale of searching through that data, there's no ways you can do that with a human eyeball scrolling on a whole bunch of logs, which I like to do when you only have a few data points. So definitely being able to pick out the low-hanging fruit out of that data and looking for common indicators of potential signs of activity makes it a little bit easier for people to understand exactly what's happening on the machine. And coming back to sort of incident response perspective, we were speaking about a failure and a detection point of view. So if we assume that your detection technology has failed you, we go and we get even more data, sometimes just small pieces of information from hosts, right up to full disk images, and supplementing it with network data. So now we're sitting with even more data to have a look at, and it's not always in the same format. So if I had a wish list if I had a genie and I could say, hey, please make 2 problems go away, I would say one of them is probably getting all the data in the right format, so that, we could analyze it in the same sort of viewer or database. And then I guess the second one would, speak to more of the softer side of things, or the incident management perspective, while analysts are, trying to figure out what happened. They've often got management breathing down their necks saying, hey, is this an incident or not? We need an update in 10 minutes. And we realistically, the analyst needs a couple of hours to actually find their feet in terms of what's going on. So getting some form of incident management capability where we can easily track ongoing incidents and tasks and what people are currently busy with, that's definitely needed in the space. A lot of people do use sort of various platforms and tools. Quite frankly, I haven't really come across any one particular platform so far to date that is a one-size-fits-all solution that ticks all the boxes.
I think we can all agree that some of these technologies can be tremendously helpful, but you're also sounding like there are limits to what they can do. So, John, you don't think cybersecurity professionals are ever going to be replaced by AI or other types of automation?
Definitely not. I mean, hopefully we do get to a point where AI would be able to pick up most of these forgotten detections, and it definitely has a big place, as well as improving the analyst's ability to pick out common findings. But as we've experienced in several years of the security industry, the level of false positives is just too great to overwhelm a small team of analysts. There's no point having an alert if it's a false positive from a management point of view. So we will always need people to sort of sift through the data and classify exactly what this really means. Is this an incident? And then secondly, go and look at what does this mean to from the business point of view. If this is a decommissioned server that's been compromised, it doesn't really have much of a business impact. But if this is on their internet-facing customer portal, that's sort of a different aspect to it. And the way that businesses are changing with cloud environments, it's almost impossible for one solution to be able to integrate with an entire IT estate. So hopefully, technology does get in the way that we cover most of critical assets, but there will always be forgotten environments. It may sound quite strange, but we have been on incidents where the client forgot about a data center. That data center was completely compromised, and they had no idea they had this whole data center at all. And that does happen. So I think there's wider issues that still need to be solved before AI is even close to be able to replace our jobs completely.
Does that sound right to you, Frank?
Oh, yes. I don't see any soon that AI would replace the security professional. But I think that in some environments, like cloud environments, you can see that there's more automation and AI possible to be applied. So it's already being utilized there in more ways. And what I also think is that most of the machine learning tools are focusing on the detection part and shifting through the false positives and or the non-relevant events. But we can also look into automation more on trying to understand the threat or what is taking place, or how an attacker can move laterally by analyzing the attack defense graphs like we do in the Soccrates project. We model the infrastructure and then we automatically assess how an attacker can move laterally from the host that we have now some evidence of that it's compromised to the more critical assets that we have. And then we get a metric for what the time of compromise is, combining that with the potential impact that we can assess automatically if we have an enterprise architecture model of it or something. Then we can say, well, this is what's going on. This more situational awareness. It's not just the alerts being raised that you have to act on, but it's providing more information in the context of the infrastructure that we try to provide. So more situational awareness. And the next step is that we also want to provide option awareness. So by automatically assessing what is possible, how we can block certain attack steps or analyze those options and provide metrics for what if we do this, if we block this type of traffic, how would that impact the business and what are the benefits of doing that? So providing some options for response and having some metrics for the pros and cons of that response for the analyst would help him to more quickly make decisions on how to proceed in the incident. And that's something that we are trying to do. But the big problem we're facing here is that having an accurate model of your infrastructure is quite difficult. And this is where we are trying to work with WithSecure in the project, where we collect information from vulnerability scanners and from other tools to actually create an accurate model that we can use for these types of assessments. And if we want to go to an AI or reinforcement learning, we actually have to have a good model of our infrastructure and good understanding of what threats are capable of, how to compromise these. So that's, we're making progress, but we also have to move a little bit further than just thinking of shifting through the events that we can collect from our infrastructure. Also have a understanding what our infrastructure look like and being able to provide that information for tools to actually help the SOC analyst.
You guys are already giving perfect examples about things where automation is better than a person is, or where a person is better than a tool is. But if I'm the decision maker in a company, what's my sort of rule of thumb on that? Like, what tasks should I put the automation on and what tasks should I put the people on?
I would say that don't forget that if you introduce new tools, that you also need humans to actually configure these tools and you have training. And so a SIEM or a SOAR tool is nice to have, but making sure that these tools are effective, you have to have an engineer that can actually configure the rules for the alerts or the playbooks and make it applicable in your environment. So it's not just, we buy a tool and then we don't need humans anymore. At least that's not the case at the moment.
But that's the decision these CISOs are facing. Like, I have enough money for a new device with the new blinky box or two new people. Which one do I take, John?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with where Frank was going with the conversation. But I always say, what's the point of buying a Ferrari for race day if you don't have a professional driver? So you really need to look at what is the tool really providing your organization and where does it fit in? Yes, you do have to still onboard the tool with project managers and engineers to get it up and running and then train the staff on how to use it. But arguably, one of the most important things is using it on a daily basis, fine-tuning it and all continues to improve it. If you don't continue to improve your product and your tools, it's just going to be stagnant and forgotten about and no longer used. I've responded to multiple incidents where a serious breach was detected initially, but just because nobody was monitoring the console, it went unnoticed for weeks and actually caused major incidents that made front page of certain newspapers type of attacks. And that could have ranged from low-level sophisticated attacks, so-called script kiddies, all the way to nation states. Attackers only use the simplest tools they need to get the job done. And if nobody's looking at the console, there's no point having the tool in the first place.
I guess what I'm wondering, going back to that example about the Ferrari is that, I'm a fair driver myself. Maybe I can drive this Ferrari. Maybe I'm professional quality enough. How do I tell? Like if I'm the CISO of a company, how do I know which one I need more, new blinky boxes or new people?
Yeah, well, I guess that's when you speak to organizations like WithSecure, and we do a thorough assessment of that for you. Pretending that we the APT, whatever is your favorite number, and we really put those things to the test, right from detection capability all the way right through to your response capability. What did your SOC do during these times? And quite often we do, depending on the level of assessment, it is very easy to get past a lot of these state-of-the-art tools if you've got the right team behind it. But towards the end of these engagements, we typically go on and turn the noise up just a little bit to cause a bit of chaos and see exactly where they fit in. But, not everyone needs a Ferrari at the end of the day. It depends on the level of threats that you're facing and what your current capability is. If you're still riding a bicycle, at least start with a hatchback or a sedan before looking to the F1 circuit.
I think we've taken the car example as far as it'll go.
Yeah.
Frank, you're more about the tooling and automation. So what are the difficulties organizations are facing where they're turning towards tooling and automation to help them?
Well, we touched upon them already. So when you introduce a new tool, you actually have to integrate it and configure it and train people. But that's the problem that I see, that whether you want to reduce or have tools to filter out the alerts that are not relevant and false positives, etc. That takes training and configuring for it to do.
Well, let's talk about the project. So Frank, would I be correct in assuming that the point of Project Soccrates is to help organizations overcome their limitations of being sort of too reliant on personnel?
I wouldn't say too reliant on personnel. I would rather say that you want the personnel to do what they are best at. And looking at a screen with a lot of events and shifting through those is probably not the best thing that the person do. So we are focusing on helping the SOC analyst to become more efficient, effective, reducing the mean time to detection and the mean time to response. So helping them to do what's best they can do. In the Soccrates project, we have actually several components that we are working on. So one of the things is that we have some anomaly detection tools that we actually combine to say that's not that you don't get, there is some anomaly on the network, that it's anomaly on the network, and we see some strange behavior on this box, and combined we can say, well, probably there is now an attack going on. So what we want to do is make attack detection tools more actionable so that we see something anomalous and then it's a human that has to look into. No, we already tried to connect some of these dots, and then you can say, well, there is a particular set of steps now done, and we think that's lateral movement, or we see an initial compromise being taken place, and we have indications that it's successful. And then you can take the next step and automate the response. So that's one of the things. Like I already said, we do automated analysis on a model of the infrastructure based on what we have seen from the creating situational awareness, that there is a better understanding of the threat, whether it's proactive or reactive to a compromise, having information on what the asset is actually doing within it. So you see an IP address, but is this, for what service is this actually used? And how big is the impact if this takes the duration is longer? So having information on what the application is that is actually running on it, what other systems depend on that application. So having the business processes and business services that are actually affected by a compromise provides better information, and also the capability for the SOC analyst to call the owner of that system and explain what's going on and which business processes and functions are now being affected by it, instead of saying, well, I see strange behavior in this IP address and it's at the Windows box, because then you're talking technical stuff and the business owner doesn't know these technical things. So making sure that the SOC analyst can talk a bit of more the business language is helping there. And then trying to make the course of actions automatically generated and helping the SOC analyst making choices there. And then the next step is actually automating the execution of it. That becomes then a next step, where you see there is standardization coming with OpenC2 and Cacao playbooks to actually automate reconfiguration of your infrastructure. That's a bit scary still for many organizations, but steps are being taken. And if you want to increase the speed of your operation and to contain an ongoing attack, then that helps. And you might still have a human in the loop there for making sure that you don't create stupid mistakes. But you want to have these course of actions assessed also on the business impact. So if you say, well, we block this type of traffic, or we turn the soft system down, that you already know which business systems are actually affected by it. So that it's clear that it's not just we take this IP offline. No, it's this business function that we take offline. So that's what we're trying to provide with all the tools that we have in the Soccrates project, and that we are working on for a nice demo and in the pilots to see if they're actually providing what we say or hope that they do.
Does that make sense to you, John?
Yeah, that sounds actually quite fantastic. But it would definitely help responders trying to understand, what the potential business impacts are. As you were saying earlier, there's just not enough people in the field, and we've got to be realistic with what we are trying to expect from each of the candidates entering the field. We can't expect 5 years experience from a business point of view in crisis management and from a technical layer. So very quite keen to get my hands on a demo and see exactly how that works. A question from me to CISOs that might be listening, quite keen to learn more about the Soccrates platform and to see if they can get involved. What would they need to do, and what's the technology requirements they need to ensure they have right in their organization to enable the Soccrates platform to do its best work?
So we have several partners that are developing components that are glued together to make the Soccrates platform. And some of these components are open source, and some of these are commercial tools. One tool was SecurityCut from Forseti, and Forseti has just been acquired by Google. So we don't know exactly what the future will be for that tool. And it's quite an important tool because it's doing the attack defense graph analysis. So it calculates from the internet or a point within the infrastructure, the attack steps to a critical asset and find the actual path that an attacker could take. And we use that for several analysis and for generating courses of actions even. So it's quite an important tool. But would I recommend CISO? So what I would recommend is come and see at our final event or contact us, and we can do in a couple of months a demo, what it entails. And it's not just saying, well, buy the Soccrates platform, but subscribe to our vision that you have to do a little bit more than just shifting through the events, but also analyze it in the context of an infrastructure. And doing that with business impact analysis tools and with threat assessment tools that can calculate attack paths through your infrastructure, etc. And see how that can benefit in both the proactive and the reactive responses.
Well, sounds like there's work still to be done by both automated systems and people. So I want to thank you guys for joining us today and talking us through this hairy situation.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. Bye.
That was the show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please get in touch with us through Twitter with the hashtag Cybersauna with your feedback, comments, and ideas. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe.